Lance Stroll is once again under the spotlight, and unfortunately, it's not for the reasons he, or Aston Martin, would want. The Canadian has been struggling to find his rhythm in Formula One. And while losing out to Fernando Alonso is hardly surprising given the Spaniard's two-time world champion pedigree, the consistency of those defeats is raising eyebrows across the paddock. Losing every single time is not what the team, or even Stroll himself, could have imagined when this pairing began. The latest disappointment came at Monza, a circuit where Stroll has previously shown flashes of brilliance. Yet this time, he was nowhere to be found. Adding fuel to the fire is a fresh report from a Brazilian journalist claiming that Stroll actually wanted to retire from Formula One 2 years ago, only for his father and team owner Lance Stroll to veto the decision. Suddenly, the conversation isn't just about performance anymore, but whether Lance even loves racing at all, and if there's any realistic way back for him, both mentally and competitively. Monza perfectly encapsulated Stroll's ongoing struggles. What should have been an opportunity to remind the paddock of his pedigree instead turned into another weekend of frustration. His race unraveled during a disastrous pit stop that lasted over 16 seconds, an eternity in modern Formula One. The issue began with a stubborn front left wheel nut, and by the time it was sorted, Stroll remained stationary with no green light from the pit gantry. From his cockpit, he could see Alpine's mechanics releasing Pierre Gasly, and driving off without a signal would have risked chaos in the pit lane. For a driver already desperate for confidence, the delay was devastating. Over the radio, he expressed disbelief at the malfunction, and though reassured to push on, the damage was done. What was meant to be a late charge became an uneventful crawl to the flag, and his post-race debrief left little doubt about his discontent. This wasn't a one-off. Other teams, including Red Bull, have also suffered pit gantry issues this season, but context is everything. For Stroll, this was just the latest entry in a growing catalog of frustrations that continue to define his time in green. He had started 16th, stretched his first stint on hards in the hope of a late advantage, and even found himself running as high as 8th at one stage. Yet, without the botched pit stop, Aston Martin themselves admitted that 12th was the ceiling of his race. Even when circumstances went his way, Stroll simply cannot find a path to the points. All of this feeds into the swirling rumors about his future. Reports have been circulating for months that Lance's heart is no longer fully in Formula One, with whispers of an interest in switching to tennis or walking away from the sport altogether. David Croft from Sky Sports hinted at this earlier in the season, and now Brazilian outlets claim Stroll even asked his father to release him from the team on 2 separate occasions, both requests firmly rejected. For Lance Stroll, who has poured hundreds of millions into Aston Martin, the thought of his son walking away must feel intolerable. But the real question is this: is Lance racing for himself, or is he simply fulfilling his father's dream? When asked directly at Monza, Stroll dismissed the retirement reports. "I had no plans on doing that," he said flatly. Not sure where that came from. I guess he needed something to say. His denial, however, sounded more like damage control than a passionate declaration of commitment. In fact, his entire demeanor that weekend hinted at someone just going through the motions. His media appearances were perfunctory at best, bordering on hostile at worst. When asked about his strategy, his one-word reply was, "Yep." When pressed for positives from the race, he muttered, "Not much." Eventually, he stopped answering questions altogether, leaving journalists, and even his own PR staff, visibly uncomfortable. It was a stark contrast to his earlier career moments at Monza, where as a rookie he celebrated a front-row start in the wet, and later, in 2020, claimed a podium after a dramatic race. Back then, Stroll seemed poised to build a respectable career in Formula One. Now, nearly 5 years later, that promise feels like a distant memory. The same circuit that once gave him glory now laid bare his decline. Behind the scenes, Aston Martin continued to publicly defend him. Trackside chief Mike Crack explained Stroll's lack of enthusiasm as understandable frustration after another race spent fighting for nothing. He said the team had gambled on a safety car that never came, leaving Stroll stranded on worn tires before the ill-fated pit stop. He stressed that Lance was pushing to the limit despite having no reward to chase. But even in this defense, the undertone was unmistakable. Stroll is trapped in a cycle of missed opportunities and mounting disappointments, and matters are only complicated further by the looming horizon of 2026. Aston Martin is investing heavily in preparation for the new regulations, luring Adrian Newey and other top engineering talent to Silverstone. Their ambitions are clear. They want to be championship contenders, not midfield survivors. And that raises the uncomfortable question, can Lance Stroll, with his current trajectory, realistically remain part of that vision? Teams that dream of titles need two drivers capable of consistently scoring points, not one who lingers in the shadows of his teammate. Fernando Alonso has been nothing short of remarkable since joining Aston Martin, often dragging the car higher than it deserves to be, and proving that age has not dulled his instincts. Stroll, meanwhile, hasn't outqualified Alonso in over a year, a staggering run of 27 consecutive defeats in qualifying. It's one thing to be occasionally beaten by a driver of Alonso's caliber, but to never get the better of him even once paints a grim picture. If Stroll really did consider retirement in the past, perhaps those instincts were right. Formula One is brutally unforgiving, and drivers without passion are quickly exposed. The truth is, Stroll looks like a man tired of the grind, his spark fading with every passing race. Even his once characteristic aggression, his willingness to take bold risks, seems to have evaporated. At Monza, when Esteban Ocon forced him off the track, he didn't even bother to comment on the incident or challenge the penalty. The silence spoke louder than words. Of course, redemption is still possible. Stroll is only 25, young by Formula One standards, and with the right motivation, he could rediscover his form. But that requires more than just a fast car or a supportive team. It requires desire, and that's the one thing that cannot be engineered. No amount of his father's money or Aston Martin's technical upgrades can restore the hunger to compete if it simply isn't there. Right now, Lance Stroll stands at a crossroads. On one side is the possibility of a career revival, recapturing the promise he once showed and silencing his critics. On the other side is a slow fade into irrelevance, remembered more as the billionaire's son who never quite justified his seat than for any real achievements on track. Whether he admits it or not, the decision may already be forming in his mind. And if the reports of his earlier attempts to walk away are true, perhaps we are only waiting for the inevitable moment when he finally follows through. The reality is harsh. Formula One will move on with or without Lance Stroll. Aston Martin is building towards a future they hope will deliver championships, and Alonso cannot do it alone. If Stroll cannot rediscover both speed and passion, the team may soon have no choice but to look elsewhere. Until then, the Canadian continues to occupy one of the most scrutinized seats in the sport, with every underwhelming weekend only adding fuel to the fire. Whether Lance finds his way back or quietly bows out, the outcome will shape not only his own legacy but Aston Martin's trajectory. And as things stand, it's difficult to see the former happening without a dramatic change in both mindset and performance.